A proud billionaire is dying. A little boy saves him. Then the boy reveals he is his son. The air was gone. His throat was closing. 50 of Chicago's wealthiest elites stood in a circle, watching a billionaire suffocate on a marble floor. His fiancée had already fled. His board members were screaming for security. He was going to die in the atrium of a hospital he thought he owned. Then, a small hand pressed a yellow auto-injector into his thigh. A 7-year-old boy, with his exact stormy gray eyes, leaned in close. The boy did not cry. He just counted to 5, and whispered a secret that would shatter Cassian's entire world 7 years ago. Cassian told the woman he loved to take his father's hush money and disappear. He never knew she tore the check to shreds. He never knew she was carrying his twins, and as the oxygen finally rushed back into his lungs, he realized the desperate ex-girlfriend he had just tried to ruin was actually the brilliant surgeon who held the patents to his entire medical empire. Have you ever had someone look right at you, decide they know exactly what you are worth, and treat you like you are entirely disposable? It is a specific kind of heartbreak when the person you used to love looks at your past and sees a liability instead of a partner. But it is also the exact moment a quiet woman decides to stop playing small. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to take a second to appreciate the beautiful, faithful women tuning in today. So many of you spend your lives pouring into others, carrying your families with grace, strength, and unshakable faith. This channel is your sanctuary, a place where we celebrate women finally getting the peace and justice they deserve. If you want to bless this channel and help our sisterhood grow, please hit the subscribe button now. It is completely free and means the world to me. Drop "I'm a queen" in the comments and let me know what state or city you are listening from. Now sit back and enjoy this story. This is the story of a mother who let a billionaire think he held all the power, right before she reminded him who actually built his empire. 12 hours before the ambulance was called, the grand atrium of the Chicago Memorial Hospital was filled with the sound of tiny shattering bells. It was just the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, but to Amara Caldwell it sounded like a warning. She stood near the edge of the marble terrace. The heavy scent of white lilies and expensive perfume clung to the humid evening air. She wore a tailored emerald green gown that draped elegantly over her frame. Her dark hair was pinned back in a flawless, severe twist. She looked exactly like what she was. She was a woman who commanded rooms without ever having to raise her voice. She was the chief of cardiology, a pioneer in her field, and a mother who had built a fortress around her life. But the man currently blocking her path to the exit did not see a brilliant surgeon. He only saw a ghost he thought he had paid to disappear. Cassian Hayes stepped into her personal space. He was the billionaire CEO of Hayes Global Logistics. His tuxedo was impeccably cut. His stormy gray eyes were cold and hard. He smelled of cedar and old money. It was a scent that used to make Amara's heart race. Now it just made her incredibly tired. "I should have known you would find your way back to my wallet," Cassian said. His voice was a low, gravelly whisper meant only for her. It dripped with 7 years of unspent venom. "When my foundation announced the pediatric grant, I told the board we needed strict vetting. I didn't think you would have the audacity to apply under a new name." Amara did not flinch. She did not cross her arms or step back to create distance. She simply looked up at him. Her dark eyes were entirely devoid of the fear he so clearly expected to see. "I didn't apply for your grant, Cassian," she said. Her voice was smooth and even. "And I don't want your money." Cassian let out a harsh, mocking laugh. He leaned in closer, his jaw tight with anger. "Save it, Amara. 7 years ago you took my father's check and vanished. You sold me out when my family needed me most. And now you are here, playing the noble doctor in the very hospital my family built. You want a payout? Fine. Name your price, take it, and get out of my city before my fiancé realizes you are here." Amara held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. She saw the arrogance in his posture. She saw the defensive wall he had built out of pride and inherited wealth. He truly believed she was the villain of his story. He believed the lies his father had fed him. "Enjoy your gala, Cassian," Amara said softly. She stepped around him. Her silk gown brushed against his tuxedo trousers. She walked out into the cool Chicago night. She did not look back. She had learned a long time ago that you cannot explain your worth to a man who is committed to misunderstanding you. 10 minutes later, Amara pushed through the heavy double doors of the pediatric cardiology wing. The chaotic noise of the charity gala faded behind her. It was replaced by the soft, rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the hushed voices of night shift nurses. This was her real world. This was where she actually made a difference. She walked down the quiet hallway and entered her private office. She locked the door behind her. Sitting on the leather sofa in the corner were 2 7-year-old children. They were illuminated by the warm glow of a brass desk lamp. Leo was meticulously coloring a diagram of a human heart. His brow was furrowed in deep concentration. Maya was reading a thick chapter book. Her legs swung gently over the edge of the cushions. When they looked up, Amara felt the familiar fierce ache in her chest. Leo had Cassian's stormy grey eyes and his stubborn, square jaw. Maya had his quiet, observant intensity. They were the hidden truth Amara carried every single day. They were the reason she breathed. "Mom, you are back early," Leo said. He held up his drawing with a proud smile. "I colored the left ventricle red because it pumps the oxygenated blood." "It is perfect, baby," Amara said. She crossed the room and kissed the top of his head. She knelt in front of them and smoothed Maya's dark curls. "Are you two ready to go home? Can we see the koi fish in the atrium first?" Maya asked softly. "The ones with the orange spots?" Amara hesitated. The atrium was where Cassian and his elite guests were currently celebrating. The last thing she wanted was to expose her children to that toxic environment. But the gala was winding down. The children had been cooped up in her office all evening while she finished her rounds. They deserved a moment to just be kids. "Okay," Amara smiled. "Just for 5 minutes. Then we go home." As she gathered her coat, Amara looked at her reflection in the dark office window. Cassian Hayes thought she was a gold digger who had taken his father's hush money. He thought she was a coward who ran away when things got hard. He didn't know the truth. 7 years ago, Arthur Hayes had called her into his mahogany-paneled office. Cassian's father had handed her a check for $2 million. He told her it was a generous severance package for her time with his son. Then, he threatened to destroy her medical career. He threatened to tie her up in court until the children were born, and then take full custody. He told her that Cassian was already engaged to Sloan Kensington for a corporate merger, and that Amara was nothing but a distraction. Amara had looked the older man in the eye. She had torn the $2 million check into tiny pieces and dropped them in his silver trash can. She had left Chicago that very night to protect her twins from a family that viewed human beings as liabilities. She had changed her name. She had finished her fellowship in another state. She had pioneered a non-invasive pediatric cardiac procedure that revolutionized the entire field. She was not a struggling ex-girlfriend begging for a grant. She was Dr. Amara Caldwell. She held the patents to the very technology the Hayes Foundation was currently trying to buy. She had built an empire of her own, entirely in the shadows, and she had done it to keep her children safe from the very man who had just accused her of selling him out. Amara grabbed her purse and opened the office door. She was done hiding in the shadows. Tomorrow, Cassian Hayes was going to find out exactly who he had tried to destroy. The visit to the koi fish lasted exactly 4 minutes. Amara stood by the indoor pond in the hospital atrium, watching Leo and Maya point at the large orange and white fish gliding through the water. The gala guests had mostly cleared out. The crystal flutes were being swept away by the catering staff. Amara kept her children close, her hand resting gently on Leo's shoulder. She breathed in the quiet reality of her life. She had built this safe harbor with her own 2 hands. She loaded them into her car and drove them back to their brownstone. She tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her dining table and reviewed the legal documents she had kept locked away for 3 years. She was done running. The next morning, the tension in the pediatric cardiology wing was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Amara was in the middle of a complex consultation with a young patient's parents when her assistant knocked on the door. The assistant looked nervous. She informed Amara that Sloan Kensington had arrived on the ward. Sloan had brought 2 corporate lawyers with her. They were currently waiting in the main glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall. Amara handed the patient's chart back to the attending nurse. She smoothed the front of her white coat. She did not rush. She walked down the corridor with the measured, deliberate steps of a woman who knew exactly who she was. When Amara pushed open the conference room door, Sloan was standing at the head of the long oak table. Sloan wore a pristine white designer suit that looked entirely out of place in a working hospital. Her blonde hair was styled into a sharp bob. She wore her generational wealth like a weapon. The two lawyers flanked her, carrying thick leather briefcases. Cassian was there too. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. His face was an unreadable mask. He wore a dark navy suit, his posture rigid. He looked like a man who was waiting for an execution, though he did not yet know who the victim would be. "Dr. Caldwell," Sloan said. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We are here to discuss the Hayes Foundation's continued partnership with this wing." Amara walked to the opposite end of the table. She did not sit down. She simply placed her hands flat on the polished wood and looked at Sloan. "After reviewing your background," Sloan continued, her smile tightening into something cruel, "we have decided to pull our funding. We feel that our capital would be better utilized by a more established, more traditional research team. We will be redirecting the grant money to the Kensington Institute by the end of the month." It was a blatant power play. Sloan had found out about Amara's past connection to Cassian. She was using the Foundation's money to evict Amara from the hospital her family had built. She wanted to humiliate the woman Cassian had once loved. Cassian turned away from the window. He looked at Amara. His stormy grey eyes were challenging her. He expected her to fight. He expected her to beg. He expected her to show the desperation he was so sure she possessed. He thought she was a struggling doctor who needed his family's charity to survive. Amara did not raise her voice. She did not show a single ounce of anger. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a slim leather folder. She opened it and slid a single heavily stamped document across the table toward Sloan. "If you are still here, drop a heart in the comments, just so I know you are with me for what is coming." "What is this?" Sloan asked. Her smile faltered as she looked down at the legal paperwork. "That is the licensing agreement for the Caldwell valve," Amara said. Her tone was perfectly level. It was the voice of a surgeon explaining a routine procedure. "The technology your foundation has been bragging about funding for the last 3 years. I invented it. I own the patents." The silence in the room became absolute. The hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded very loud. Amara leaned forward slightly. "The Hayes Foundation does not fund my research, Sloan. You rent my intellectual property. You pay my trust a licensing fee every quarter to use my name and my technology in your global clinics. If you pull your funding from this ward, you breach the exclusivity clause of our contract. You will lose the rights to the Caldwell valve entirely. Your global clinics will have to rip the technology out of their operating rooms by Friday." Sloan stared at the document. The color completely drained from her face. She looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was Amara's signature. Cassian stepped away from the window. He walked slowly to the table and looked at the paperwork. His hands gripped the edge of the wood. He looked from the legal document to Amara. The woman he thought was a desperate ghost was actually the architect of his company's most profitable medical division. She was not a charity case. She was the landlord. "You are bluffing," Cassian said. His voice lacked its usual conviction. It sounded hollow. "I do not bluff, Cassian," Amara said quietly. "I build. Something you would not understand." She did not wait for a response. She turned and walked out of the room. She left the billionaire and his fiancée standing in the wreckage of their own assumptions. She had not just defended her territory. She had completely redrawn the map. "If you didn't see that coming, hit the like button so I know you are enjoying the drama." Cassian stood in the conference room for a long time after Amara left. Sloan was shouting at her lawyers, demanding they find a loophole in the contract. Cassian tuned her out. His mind was reeling. The narrative he had clung to for 7 years was disintegrating. His father had told him Amara was a gold digger. But a gold digger does not invent a revolutionary medical device and hide it behind a blind trust. A gold digger does not turn down millions of dollars to build her own empire from scratch. He needed air. He needed to get away from Sloan's shrill voice. He needed to make sense of the woman who had completely upended his reality. Cassian walked out of the conference room and bypassed the executive elevators. He found himself wandering aimlessly down the corridors of the pediatric ward. The halls here were painted in soft blues and yellows. There were murals of animals on the walls. It was quiet, save for the distant sound of a cartoon playing in a patient's room. He turned a corner and nearly tripped over a small boy sitting cross-legged on the linoleum floor. Cassian caught his balance and looked down. The boy was surrounded by a scattered array of colored pencils. He was carefully sketching a diagram on a piece of heavy paper. He looked up, and Cassian felt the air leave his lungs. The boy had his eyes. They were the exact same stormy gray eyes that Cassian saw in the mirror every single morning. The boy also had his stubborn, square jaw. "Watch where you are going, mister," the boy said. There was no malice in his voice. He just pointed to his drawing with a blue pencil. "Do you know what this is?" Cassian sank to his knees. He completely forgot about his bespoke suit. He forgot about the board meeting. He forgot about Sloan. He just stared at the child. "It is a heart," Cassian managed to say. His voice was thick. "It is a heart with a ventricular septal defect," the boy corrected him matter-of-factly. He tapped the center of the drawing. "But it is okay. Dr. Caldwell fixed it." Cassian stared at the boy's wrist. He noticed a bright red medical bracelet resting against the child's skin. Cassian's eyes locked onto the engraved white text. It read, "Leo, severe tree nut allergy. EpiPen required." A cold shiver ran down Cassian's spine. He had the exact same rare, life-threatening allergy. It was a genetic quirk that had nearly killed him twice in his childhood. His father had used it as an excuse to keep him isolated and controlled. "What is your name?" Cassian asked. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Leo," the boy said. He looked at Cassian with a strange, innocent curiosity. "You look sad. My mom says people who wear suits all the time are usually hiding something." Before Cassian could process the sheer weight of the boy's words, the sharp click of high heels echoed down the hall. Sloan appeared at the end of the corridor. Her face was twisted in disgust as she looked at the scene before her. "Cassian, what on earth are you doing on the floor?" Sloan's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the pediatric ward. She glared at Leo with undisguised disgust. "Come away from the charity cases. The press is waiting in the lobby for our photo op." Leo shrank back slightly, his gray eyes widening. He did not cry, and he did not panic. He simply reached out and began calmly packing his colored pencils back into his small canvas case. He was used to people looking at him with pity or annoyance in the hospital. A sudden, blinding rage flared in Cassian's chest. He opened his mouth to tell Sloan to be quiet, but before he could speak, a nearby patient room door opened. Amara stepped out into the hallway. Her presence was like a physical shield. She moved with terrifying speed, placing herself directly between Sloan and the boy. She placed a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. She looked at Cassian with a fury that burned hotter than anything he had ever seen. "Get away from my son," Amara said. Her voice trembled with restrained power. "Your son Cassian," whispered. The pieces violently collided in his mind. The timeline. 7 years. The stormy gray eyes. The severe tree nut allergy. "Amara, is he—" "He's a patient under my care." Amara cut him off. Her tone was absolute, leaving no room for argument. "And you are trespassing in my ward. Leave, now." Sloan scoffed, adjusting her pristine white jacket. "Come on, Cassian. Let the desperate woman play her games. She clearly just wants attention." Cassian stood up slowly. He looked at Leo, who was now zipping his backpack with steady hands. Then he looked at Amara. For the first time in his life, the proud billionaire had absolutely nothing to say. The foundation of his entire world was cracking beneath his feet. He turned and walked away. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of suffocating realization. Cassian locked himself in his executive office on the top floor of the Hayes Global building. He stared at the city below, but all he could see were Leo's eyes. He pulled up the hospital employee registry on his encrypted laptop. He bypassed the security protocols he had installed himself. He searched for Amara Caldwell. He found her employment record. He found her medical patents. And then he found her emergency contact forms. Leo and Maya Caldwell, twins, born exactly 7 years ago in a small clinic in Seattle. Cassian pressed his hands against his face. He thought about his father. Arthur Hayes had sat in his leather chair 7 years ago, swirling a glass of scotch, and told Cassian that Amara took the money and ran. He said she did not want the burden of a failing family. Cassian had believed it because it was easier than believing his father was a monster. He had built a wall of arrogance to protect himself from the grief. And today, that wall had been completely pulverized by a 7-year-old boy with a blue pencil. Sloan burst into his office an hour later. She was frantic about the public relations disaster. The board was panicking about the Caldwell valve licensing agreement. She had organized a private dinner in the hospital's glass-enclosed Botanical Atrium to smooth things over and project a united front. She demanded Cassian attend to reassure the investors. Cassian agreed, entirely numb. He did not care about the board. He only cared about the woman he had just threatened to evict. The midpoint of the evening brought a heavy, inescapable tension. The Botanical Atrium was a stunning space. It was filled with blooming orchids and a massive multi-tiered koi pond. The glass ceiling let in the dark blue twilight of the Chicago sky. Amara was there. She had brought Leo and Maya to the atrium before their shift home. She let them watch the fish from a safe distance while she spoke quietly with the night nursing staff near the entrance. She looked tired, but her posture was as unyielding as ever. She watched her children with a fierce, quiet devotion. At the center table, Cassian sat with Sloan and 6 members of the hospital board. The table was set with fine china and crystal. Cassian was entirely detached. He did not touch his wine. His mind was racing with the impossible truth he had uncovered. He had spent 7 years hating Amara for abandoning him. He had just realized she had been protecting his children from his father's cruelty. Sloan noticed Cassian staring across the room at Amara. Her artificial smile tightened. She was desperate to regain his attention and assert her dominance in front of the board. She clapped her hands sharply for the waitstaff. "I have ordered a special dessert to celebrate our new merger," Sloan announced loudly. Her voice echoed off the glass walls. A bespoke macadamia nut tart from the new executive chef. Cassian was lost in thought, staring at the way Amara gently brushed a curl behind Maya's ear. A waiter placed a small, elegant plate in front of him. Cassian picked up his silver fork and took a single bite automatically, his mind entirely elsewhere. The waiter stepped back and cleared his throat. The tart features a roasted macadamia nut crust, finished with a bitter almond glaze. Cassian's head snapped up. The taste registered on his tongue. Rich, oily, heavy. "Sloan, no," Cassian said. His voice was suddenly tight. "You know I cannot." He did not finish the sentence. The reaction hit him like a freight train. It was faster and more violent than it had been since he was a child. Cassian dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china. His hands flew to his throat. His airway was swelling shut with terrifying speed. He tried to speak, to ask for his medicine, but only a ragged, wet wheeze came out. His face flushed violently, then turned a terrifying shade of pale. He pushed his chair back, but his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the marble floor. "Cassian?" Sloan asked, annoyed. She thought he was throwing a tantrum. Then she saw his eyes bulging. She screamed, "Oh my God! Someone help! He is choking!" The board members panicked. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Men in expensive suits backed away, entirely useless. Sloan was completely paralyzed by fear. She backed away from the table, her hands covering her mouth. "Call an ambulance!" Sloan shrieked. "Where is his medicine? I do not know where he keeps it." She turned and ran toward the atrium doors to find security. She left Cassian collapsed on the cold marble, gasping for air that would not come. The people who claimed to love him, the people who wanted his money, were fleeing the room. His vision blurred. The edges of the atrium went dark. He was going to die here, surrounded by blooming orchids, abandoned by his fiancée. "Mister?" A small, calm voice cut through the roaring in Cassian's ears. He forced his heavy eyes open. Leo was kneeling beside him. The 7-year-old boy was not crying. He was not panicking. He had seen this exact reaction in himself his whole life. Leo unzipped his small canvas backpack. His hands were steady as he pulled out a yellow auto-injector. "My mom says you always have to carry 2, Leo said. His voice was remarkably steady. "Hold still." With a practiced, forceful motion, the 7-year-old boy jammed his own EpiPen into Cassian's outer thigh. He held it there, counting out loud just like his mother had taught him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cassian gasped as the epinephrine flooded his system. His airway slowly, agonizingly began to open. He sucked in a desperate, ragged breath, coughing violently. As his vision cleared, he looked at the boy hovering over him. Leo was holding Cassian's hand, his small fingers wrapping around the billionaire's trembling ones. "It is okay," Leo whispered. "My dad has this allergy too. My mom says it is in our blood." The words hit Cassian harder than the anaphylaxis. "My dad." Amara burst through the atrium doors, her medical bag in hand, her face a mask of pure terror. She dropped to her knees on the other side of Cassian, her hands flying over his pulse points. She looked at the empty EpiPen in Leo's hand, then down at Cassian. Cassian looked back at her. The arrogance was entirely gone from his stormy grey eyes. In its place was a profound, devastating realization. He reached out, his trembling fingers brushing against Amara's wrist. "You stayed?" he choked out, his voice raw and broken. "You protected them." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she did not pull away. The hidden truth was finally out in the open. The proud billionaire had been saved by the son he never knew he had. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of shouting voices and heavy boots. The pristine elegance of the Botanical Atrium was entirely shattered. Amara took control of the room with the sharp, practiced authority of a chief of medicine. She directed the EMTs, rattling off Cassian's vitals, his exact weight, and the precise dosage of epinephrine Leo had administered. Sloan returned a few minutes later. She was breathless and entirely useless. She stood near the orchids, wringing her hands, asking the nurses if the press had seen anything. Cassian lay on the stretcher, his chest heaving as the oxygen finally reached his brain. He turned his head. He ignored Sloan completely. He kept his eyes locked on Amara. Amara was kneeling beside Leo. She was checking the boy for any signs of stress. Leo just smiled and held up his empty yellow auto-injector. He was not crying. He was not shaking. He was simply a little boy who knew how to handle an emergency because his mother had taught him how to survive. Cassian reached out from the stretcher. His hand trembled violently. He caught the fabric of Amara's white coat. She looked down at him. Her dark eyes were guarded, but she did not pull away. "I am sorry," Cassian mouthed. The words made no sound, but she read them perfectly. Amara gently pried his fingers from her coat. She stood up and guided Leo and Maya toward the exit. She did not ride in the ambulance. She did not follow him to the intensive care unit. She took her children home. She had spent 7 years protecting them from the Hayes family, and she was not going to stop now. The earned vulnerability did not happen in a boardroom. It happened in the quiet, sterile isolation of the ICU. Cassian woke up to the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the glow of the medical equipment and the pale moonlight filtering through the blinds. His throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. His chest ached. He turned his head slowly. Amara was sitting in the vinyl chair beside his bed. She was reviewing a patient chart under the soft light of a small lamp. She had changed out of her emerald gown. She wore simple grey scrubs. She looked exhausted, but her posture was as unyielding as ever. Cassian did not try to sit up. He just looked at her. He was entirely stripped of his armor, his pride, and his illusions. 7 years, Cassian whispered. His voice was hoarse and broken. Amara closed the chart. She placed it on the tray table and folded her hands in her lap. She did not offer him a comforting smile. She simply waited. "He told me you took the money and left," Cassian said. A tear slipped down his pale cheek, soaking into the hospital pillow. "My father told me you did not want the burden of a failing family. He said you took a $2 million check and moved to Europe. Your father threatened to use his wealth to tie me up in court until the children were born," Amara said. Her voice was quiet but firm. It carried no anger, only the cold, hard facts of history. "He told me he would take full custody. He said you were already engaged to Sloan for a corporate merger, and that I was nothing but a distraction." Cassian closed his eyes. The magnitude of his failure crashed over him. He had spent years building an empire, entirely blind to the fact that his own father had stolen his family. "I tore up his check, Cassian," Amara continued. "I dropped the pieces in his silver trash can. I left Chicago to build a life where my children would be valued for who they are, not what they could buy. I changed my name. I finished my fellowship. I built the Caldwell valve so I would never have to rely on a man who thought my life had a price tag. Cassian opened his eyes. He looked at the woman he had called a gold digger just 12 hours ago. The shame was a physical weight crushing his chest. When you came back to Chicago, I treated you with the exact same cruelty my father taught me.
I accused you of selling me out. I tried to evict you. You believed what you wanted to believe, Amara said softly. It was easier to think I was the villain than to question your father. Sloan did not even know about my allergy, Cassian said. The bitterness was heavy in his throat. We have been engaged for 2 years. She ordered a macadamia nut tart to impress the board. When I started choking, she did not look for my medicine. She ran away. She left me on the floor to die. He turned his head to look at Amara. His stormy gray eyes were completely entirely shattered. But my son, Cassian whispered. A 7-year-old boy I have never spoken to. A boy I never knew existed. He knew exactly what to do. He saved my life. Amara set her hands flat on her knees. She leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto his. Leo is brave, and Maya is brilliant. They are everything good in this world, Cassian. They are kind, and they are smart, and they do not know the meaning of the word cruel. I will not let your toxic legacy touch them. I do not want my legacy, Cassian said. His voice broke. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers on the metal bedrail. He did not touch her. He knew he had not earned the right. I do not want the company. I do not want the money. I just want to know them. Amara, please. I was a fool. I was so blind. Amara looked at his trembling hand. She saw the genuine, agonizing remorse in his eyes. This was not the arrogant CEO who had cornered her at the gala. This was a broken man, finally awake to the damage he had caused. You do not get to be their father just because you share their DNA, Cassian, Amara said softly. You have to earn it. You have to prove that you are a man who protects, not a man who destroys. You have to show them that you are safe. Cassian nodded slowly. He absorbed the weight of her words. He did not argue. He did not demand his rights. He simply accepted the boundaries she had drawn. Tell me what to do, Cassian said. I will do whatever it takes. 6 months later, the Chicago skyline looked entirely different to Cassian. He no longer viewed it as a kingdom he owned. He viewed it as a place where he was finally learning how to live. He had spent the first month dismantling his father's toxic board of directors. He had legally severed ties with Arthur Hayes, stripping the older man of his voting power and his executive titles. He had broken off his engagement with Sloan Kensington. Sloan had quietly retreated to her family's estate after the public fallout of the Atrium incident, taking her pristine white suits and her artificial sweetness with her. Cassian had stepped down as CEO of Hayes Global Logistics. He had taken a lesser advisory role, redirecting his focus entirely to the Hayes Foundation. He was currently funneling millions of dollars into pediatric cardiac research, specifically funding clinics that utilize the Caldwell valve. He was paying his debt to the woman who had built it. But his real work was not happening in a glass tower. It was happening in a warm, sunlit kitchen in a brownstone in Lincoln Park. It was Saturday morning. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and vanilla extract. Cassian stood at the stove. He was wearing a simple gray sweater and dark jeans. He was carefully flipping pancakes on a cast-iron skillet. He paused to check the ingredients on the side of the box for the 3rd time. Nut-free facility. He would check it 10 times if he had to. Sitting at the marble kitchen island were Leo and Maya. Maya was deeply engrossed in a thick book about astrophysics. Leo was enthusiastically explaining the aerodynamics of a paper airplane to Cassian. If you fold the wing like this, it catches the drag, Leo said. He held up the folded paper, demonstrating the angle with his small fingers. But if you make the nose too heavy, it just dives straight into the floor. Cassian smiled. It was a genuine, warm expression that reached his stormy gray eyes. He turned down the heat on the stove and walked over to the island. Show me how to do it, buddy. I always make the nose too heavy. Leo giggled. He slid off his stool and stood next to Cassian, guiding his father's large hands to fold the paper precisely. Amara walked into the kitchen. She was holding 2 ceramic mugs of coffee. She leaned against the doorframe and simply watched. She watched the man who had once broken her heart carefully fold a paper airplane under the strict, joyful instruction of their 7-year-old son. Cassian looked up and met her eyes. He did not have his billions to offer her anymore. He did not have his pride.
He had given away his power to find his purpose. As he walked over and took the coffee from her hand, his fingers brushed against hers. The touch was quiet, enduring, and filled with absolute reverence. Amara knew he finally had something much more valuable than an empire. He had learned that true power is not found in what you can buy, or who you can intimidate. True power is found in the quiet strength of a woman who refuses to be diminished, and the courage it takes to stand beside her. Cruelty had been answered. Loyalty had been rewarded, and the family that was almost lost had finally been found. Cassian took a slow sip of the coffee. The ceramic mug was warm against his hands. He looked around the sunlit kitchen, taking in the scuff marks on the baseboards and the colorful magnets holding Leo's drawings to the refrigerator. This was not the sterile, perfect penthouse he used to live in. This was a home. It was messy and loud and entirely real. He set the mug down on the marble counter. He watched Leo chase the paper airplane into the living room, his laughter echoing off the hardwood floors. Maya turned another page of her book, completely unbothered by the chaos her brother was creating. Cassian turned back to Amara. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He did not wear a watch anymore. He had stopped tracking his time in 15-minute increments for board meetings. His time belonged to him now, and more importantly, it belonged to them. "I was thinking," Cassian said quietly. His voice was careful, entirely stripped of the demanding tone he used to carry. The children mentioned the science museum downtown, the one with the new aerodynamics exhibit. "If it is all right with you, I would like to take them this afternoon, just for a few hours." Amara looked at him. She saw the hesitation in his eyes. He was a man who used to buy entire hospital wings without asking for permission. Now he was asking for permission to take his children to a museum. He understood that access to their lives was a privilege, not a right. "They would love that," Amara said. Her voice was soft. "Just make sure Leo eats lunch before you go. He gets cranky when his blood sugar drops." Cassian nodded, a profound relief washing over his face. "I will pack the nut-free snacks myself." "I already checked the labels twice." Amara smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that reached her dark eyes. She walked over to the stove and turned off the burner under the skillet. The smell of vanilla and warm batter filled the space between them. "You know?" Cassian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I used to think power was about making people fear you. My father taught me that. He taught me that if you show a single ounce of vulnerability, the world will take everything you have." He looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent the last 6 months learning how to build something from the ground up. "But he was wrong," Cassian continued. He looked up, meeting Amara's gaze. "Power is making people feel safe. You had all the power in the world, Amara. You had the patents. You had the money. You had the truth. You could have destroyed me in that boardroom. You could have let me die in that atrium, but you didn't. You used your power to protect." Amara leaned against the counter beside him. She did not close the distance between them, but she did not pull away either. "I did not protect you for your sake, Cassian," Amara said. Her tone was honest, devoid of any romantic illusion. "I protected Leo and Maya. They needed to know that the world is not entirely cruel. They needed to see that even when someone hurts you, you can still choose to be a healer." Cassian absorbed her words. He did not flinch. He accepted the boundary she had set. He knew he was not the hero of this story. Amara was the hero. He was just a man who had been given a second chance to stand in her light. "I understand," Cassian said softly, "and I am grateful, every single day." From the living room, Leo shouted in triumph. "Dad, look! It did a loop!" Cassian's head snapped toward the living room. It was the first time Leo had called him Dad. The word hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. Cassian looked at Amara, his stormy grey eyes wide with shock and unshed tears. Amara simply nodded. She picked up her coffee mug and took a sip. "Go see his loop, Cassian." Cassian pushed off the counter. He walked into the living room, dropping to his knees on the rug beside his son. He listened as Leo explained the physics of the paper airplane, his voice full of absolute reverence for the 7-year-old boy. Amara stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching them. She thought about the terrified young woman who had fled Chicago 7 years ago. She thought about the heavy, suffocating fear she had carried when Arthur Hayes threatened to take her children. She had taken that fear and forged it into armor. She had built an empire in the shadows, not for revenge, but for survival. She had let Cassian believe he was the one holding the leash. She had let him play the proud billionaire, completely unaware that she held the deed to his entire reality. And when the moment came, she had not used her power to destroy him. She had used it to show him exactly who he was and exactly who he could be. The consequences of Cassian's arrogance had been devastating. He had lost his company, his status, and his pride. But in losing those things, he had found his soul. He had found the family he never knew he had. Amara took a deep breath of the morning air. The fortress she had built was no longer just a place to hide. It was a place to live. She had won. Not by playing the game of billionaires and boardrooms, but by refusing to play it at all. She had simply built a better world and forced the old one to adapt to her. When someone tells you that you are not enough, you have a choice. You can accept their definition, or you can build a world where their opinion no longer matters. Amara Caldwell did not just build a world. She built a legacy that saved the very man who tried to destroy her. Do not mistake a woman's silence for submission. Real worth needs no permission to be seen, and sometimes the greatest consequences arrive in the smallest, bravest packages. What is done in private always surfaces in public, eventually. The truth always finds its way into the light. So tell me honestly, do you think Cassian deserved the second chance he was given? Or should Amara have walked away forever?
Drop your answer in the comments. And subscribe if you want more stories that ask the hard questions. Until next time, remember who holds the pen.